Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Argentina has elected a new president now in Javier Milei, who is seen as a far-right libertarian. The president-elect has pledged drastic and immediate reforms to tame the country's triple-digit inflation and end what he calls Argentina's decline. How did this relatively inexperienced politician win the election, and what policies can we expect from the new president? And will he succeed in rebuilding the country's economy? To have a closer look, I'm glad to be joined by George Heine, former Chilean ambassador to China, Professor Jiang Shixue of Shanghai University, and Salvador Marinaro, associate professor of Spanish language and literature of Fudan University. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the Dialogue show. And Ambassador, I will start with you. You are from this region. And how much do we know about the new elected president, Javier Milei? What kind of words you would use to describe him? Some people would call his proposals, ideas as outlandish or even crazy.
Well, he is an economist. He made his mark on public life on various television shows. From that moment, he was elected a member of parliament as a representative. He was on his first term. And he has become famous for very outrageous things. He has said he will close the central bank, that he will dollarize the economy, that he will legalize the buying and selling of human organs. All of these things naturally extremely controversial. Part of the secret of his success has been saying these very outrageous things. Now, whether he will be able to implement is another matter. You correctly say he is very much an outsider in Argentine politics. That is, on the one hand, his strength, because the Argentine crisis with the 140% inflation and 40% poverty rate is obviously very high. Things are bad. I was in Argentina in July. Things are not good. But the question is whether he will be able to do anything about it. Let us keep in mind that he has a very small representation in parliament, less than 15% of members of the House of Representatives, less than 10% of the senators. So the question is, will he be able to enact such a maximalist program with such minimal political support in parliament?
Mm-hmm. Marinaro, you are from Argentina and you live in China. What's your initial response when you heard the news of the election of Mr. Milei?
Okay, good afternoon, Xu Qinduo. I'm glad to be here and talking about this topic. My first impression was I felt that these elections were a tragedy for the country. Was the worst possibility of the three main candidates in Argentina's politics. And as Ambassador Haynes said, he doesn't have enough support, enough representatives in the Congress, enough political connections with the governors to put such a radical agenda and to put in order the economy of the country.
Mm-hmm. Professor Jiang Shixue, you have been following the development, you have been studying Latin American for many, many years. And tell us why people, despite all the, let's say, unusual discussion, unusual ideas from Mr. Milei, he got elected. What are the factors behind his success?
Well, in Chinese, we have a proverb saying that when you are very sick, you're going to visit all kinds of doctors. As Jorge Heine, our friend, said just now, the economy in Argentina is in a kind of a terrible shape. Very high inflation rate, very high unemployment rate, and a very big debt burden, all kinds of things. So voters in Argentina just wish to see changes. They want to see somebody who can make a miracle. So Milei is probably the right person. The voters in Argentina believe will save Argentina, but who knows what will happen? I would totally agree with my friend Salvador. Salvador said that that's probably will be a tragedy for Argentina.
All right, Professor Marinaro, so do you agree with Professor Jiang that people basically voted for change? Is that the key word?
Totally. I totally believe that the people were looking for a change, and one of the main elements behind his electoral success was precisely he hadn't had any executive experience before, so he could present in front of the voters as something new. And this one was one of the results of the representative crisis that Argentina's politics is facing. The common population don't believe in the traditional politicians. So a new one like Milei won a lot of support.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes. Now, the other thing that is important to keep in mind is the following. It seems to me this reflects a deeper problem in Argentina's model of economic development. Argentina, since its transition to democracy in the 1980s, basically there have been two coalitions, one the Peronistas, the other the Radicales, that have alternated in power. None of them have really been able to give the sort of economic growth and progress that the country deserves and needs. Argentina is one of the richest countries in the world in terms of natural resources. Its land, La Pampa Húmeda, is one of the best in the world. It has enormous mineral resources, lithium, gas, oil. Yet, they have not been able to translate this into effective progress and good jobs and good incomes for Argentine people. So this is a major problem. It's not just an election, it seems to me. It's a crisis of Argentina's economic development model over the past 40 years, and it demands major changes. Now, I don't think those changes are going to come from closing the central bank or from dollarizing the economy, but that would be a matter for another session.
Yeah, another session. But I want to ask you, what do you read as the probably number one or the priorities the president-elect needed to deal with, or what are the most important challenges for this country? Professor Jiang?
Well, let me tell you.
Go ahead, Ambassador. Yes.
Yes, almost half of the Argentine population, we talk about a population of 45 million, about 20 million receive one subsidy or another in some form or another. Obviously, they have gotten used to it, but that is a situation that makes the fiscal deficit grow ever larger. Now, if you cut off those subsidies, you would have an immediate social revolt. Now, that is what Mr. Milei has said he will do. He will cut the social subsidies because they are, strangling the fiscal budget. But to do that would risk enormous social consequences. So that is, I would say, the most serious problem. There's been social peace in Argentina until now because you have these massive social subsidies. But the moment you cut them off, people will take to the streets. So it's a bit like squaring the circle.
Professor Jiang,
I also want to
what do you see as the most pressing challenges for Mr. Milei?
Well, somebody said there are three kinds of countries in the world: developed countries, developing countries, and Argentina. That means Argentina has been suffering from all kinds of economic crisis. 20 years ago, Argentina was deeply in a debt crisis. And now, we are going to see probably, or you may say, in the words of President-elect Milei, there will be a kind of a miracle. But I doubt it. I think the most important job for him to do after he comes to power will be to deal with the economy. In order to solve all the problems, you have to promote economic growth. But this is not an easy job. So we have to design a proper policy in the first place. Then we need to implement these kinds of policies. But that's not an easy job. So who knows what will happen? I would say that 51%, I'm very pessimistic about the future of Mr. Milei's economic policies.
Well, Professor Marinaro, you were trying to say something, but before that, let me quote a few sentences probably from Mr. Milei. You know, he said of his awful privatization, he said that everything that can be in the hands of the private sector will be in the hands of the private sector. And he said, you know, today the idea that the state is spoils to be shared among politicians and their friends is over. And today, the impoverishing, omnipresent state model is over. Obviously, he's not happy with the state intervention or the role by the state. He's all for the private sector, privatization, and he's talking about slashing basically the governments. You know, he's talking about removing the ministries of education, culture, and others, including the central bank. Is this the way to save the economy?
I don't think so. That's going to be the way to save the economy, and that these policies could eventually have a positive change in the country. I will say that the main issue of Argentina's economy right now is the inflation. You have many ways of understanding what is happening with the Argentina's inflation. One of the possibilities is to explain it as the Ambassador Hein is saying, that is because of the high subsidiarization of the economy. But there is another factor, and also Argentina tried before with Macri's government to take out the subsidies and don't lead to an improvement of the economic conditions. Far away from that. The other explanation of the possibility of the inflation is that Argentina's economy is facing this kind of a large history of emission of money, of subsidiarization, and also a component in the psychology of the economic actors. The economic actors right now are so accustomed to think with a high inflation that they reproduce the inflation. So how to cut down that rate? This is the main question right now.
Chindo,
yeah, go
Chindo,
ahead.
can I?
Yes, please.
Can I just give you one example about the beef? Well, if Argentina wants to make more foreign exchanges, you have to export more beef, okay? But if you export more beef, then the so-called domestic market supply will be smaller. Then the prices for beef will go up. So the government in Argentina is caught up in this kind of difficult
Dilemma.
job, okay? So either you want to make more foreign exchanges by selling more beef, or you want to control inflation by reducing export of beef. That's a big problem.
Okay, Ambassador, now the suggestion from the president-elect is that like dollarizing the country's currency by adopting U.S. dollars. Is that the way to solve the inflation problem?
Well, I don't think it is. This has been done in other countries in Latin America. It has been done in Ecuador. It's been done in El Salvador. The problem with dollarizing the economy is that it may, in the short term, cut down inflation, but there is no going back. Once you've done it, it's very difficult to go back to your old national currency. That's number one. Number two, it also obviously removes the possibility of using monetary policy to pursue your economic policy objectives. So it's like tying your hands and limiting yourself. The same can be said, of course, for closing the central bank. So I think that would be a very dangerous move. But Mr. Milei has insisted he will do it. In principle, one should take candidates at their word.
Well, some of the ideas, obviously, I mean, we can be frank, it's radical, Professor Jiang. The idea is like, for example, eliminating the central bank and other ministries and then dollarizing the economy. As we said earlier, how likely is that these ideas will be accepted, will be approved in the parliament?
Well, I would say shutting down the central bank would be something like a joke, you know. Well, the state needs to run the economy. The state needs to manage all kinds of monetary policies, and that's the job for the central bank to do. So if you want to shut down the central bank, so who is going to manage monetary policies? So I would say this is impossible for Argentina to shut down the central bank. So it's really a kind of a joke. I think only Milei can make.
Mm-hmm. Professor Marinaro, do you think people, and including his supporters, they really think the country can afford to get rid of the central banks and dollarizing the economy?
Many economists have said in Argentina that this is not possible to do it with the amount of foreign reserves in the central banks of Argentina. The numbers of the central banks are in red right now. So if there is an actual plan to dollarize the economy, where do you take the dollars to put under circulation? This is totally, and when Milei, journalists asked Milei where the money is going to come, he said that eventually his just election will produce a movement in the international investors that will invest in the country. This is not possible to realize, really. So I don't think that many supporters realize the complexity of the situation. I think that they want to address the problem, and the factor that Milei was the only candidate trained in economics was also a factor, an important factor in this election.
Can I add one point?
Yes.
This is not the first time dollarization is mentioned in Argentina. Don't forget that 22 years ago, that was 2001, when Argentina was in a financial crisis or debt crisis. People say, so why should we have dollarization in Argentina? Let's just replace the peso with the US dollar. But after several months of discussion, so people in Argentina say it is not a clever idea to have dollarization.
Okay, so past experience is not that predicts something probably very different from the expectation of the Mr. Milei. Ambassador, we talked about the pink tide in Latin America. You have many, let's say, people would say left-wing governments in Latin America, and now we have a different, someone from the right wing, and who received the congratulations from Bolsonaro, the former president of Brazil. So can we predict, or do we see any impact of his election on this regional politics?
Well, one way to read this is sort of the end of the second pink tide. I don't quite buy that. The important thing here to understand is what we have in Latin America today is not so much, waves or tides of a certain ideological hue. Rather, what we have is a strong anti-incumbency vote. In the past 20 elections since 2019, only in 2 or 3 cases has the government coalition won. In all other cases, has the opposition won. Why? That has to do with the crisis that affects not just Argentina, which is very deep, but also the rest of the region. The region had its worst economic downturn in 120 years in 2020. It was the region that was most affected by the pandemic in terms of the number of deaths per capita. So the region is in dire straits. And what you have is a strong anti-incumbency feeling. When there are elections, people vote for the opposition. And it's important to put the election of Mr. Milei in that context.
Well, Mr. Milei also admitted, public that he's strongly pro the United States. He's pro-Israel. I mean, his first overseas visit will be in the U.S. So that kind of closeness will in any way affect, probably the economic solution to this country's problems, Ambassador?
Well, let me say the following. The two main trading partners of Argentina are Brazil and China, in that order. There is no way Argentina can move forward without those very strong economic relationships. Mr. Milei, by insulting President Lula, is already in trouble with Brazil. It has already been announced that Mr. Lula will not attend the inauguration of Mr. Milei. It is normal for the Brazilian president to attend the inauguration of the Argentine president. These are the biggest countries in South America, close neighbors, work closely together. Well, Mr. Lula will not attend the inauguration of Mr. Milei. So, relations with Brazil are already on a bad footing. We'll see how relations with China progress. But, China is the main buyer of Argentine soybean. Argentina is one of the leading producers in the world of soybeans and soybean oil. It depends very much on the Chinese market. So we'll see how those relationships evolve.
Professor Marinaro, how do people think of his, let's say, his foreign policy orientation? He's close to the U.S. He's an admirer of Donald Trump, and of course, he received congratulations from Trump. And he's basically now on, let's say, not the best terms with Brazil or with China. Do you think people are supportive of his, the shift of policies making here?
I just wanted to say that Milei is not representing the common people of Argentina. I will say more than Argentina's population and Chinese people are close friends. And this is going to be fundamental for the setback in the government. That the friendship, Argentina and China didn't have any diplomatic conflict, relevant conflict in 50 years of diplomatic relationship. So this policy, this kind of rhetoric, this speech, is not found in the national interest of the country, but it's more connected to the rise of an ideological right in Latin America. I mean, in the previous years, in the previous decade, the right, the main discourse and speech of the right was connected to pragmatism, saying to the people, okay, the economy is unfair for the 90% of the population, but this is the way it is. What we are looking now is the rise of an ideological point of view in these far-right candidates that are not connected to the national interest, but to an ideological system.
Professor Jiang, yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Well, I don't worry about the future of the bilateral relationship between China and Argentina. Now, just look at Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro said many unfavorable words about China before he became president of Brazil. But when Bolsonaro came to power, he did something which is favorable to promote a China-Brazil relationship. So now I would say Argentina and China wish to promote a bilateral relationship. This kind of bilateral relationship is not based on ideology. We know Mr. Milei is a rightist, but I don't believe that our relationship is based on his strange ideas. So in the near future, I hope, or I can believe that bilateral relationship between our two sides will continue to move forward.
Well, China is the second largest trading partner of Argentina. Of course, as earlier said, that we have been on good terms for decades, and there is no whatever diplomatic or whatever conflicts between two countries. And also, relatedly, Ambassador, he talked about Argentina will not be seeking to join the BRICS group. And of course, Argentina is supposed to become part of the grouping early next year. So what will happen there?
Yes, that's a great question. And, obviously one possibility is that Mr. Milei will refuse to accept the invitation to join the BRICS. My question is whether that will go down well with Argentine business. Because refusing to join BRICS will essentially mean a slap in the face, both on Brazil, which was very keen to invite Argentina, and to China, which is a main part of the BRICS. Will Argentine business look kindly on that kind of slap in the face? Again, to cite Mr. Bolsonaro again, Bolsonaro said when he was a candidate for the presidency of Brazil that he would leave the BRICS. When he came to office, he was told in no uncertain terms, both by the Brazilian military and by Brazilian business, that that was a bad idea, that the BRICS is a very important club and Brazil shouldn't leave it. So my bet is that Mr. Milei will receive a similar message. Whether he will listen to it is another matter.
Mr. Marinaro, how influential is the business community in Argentina, and let's say how many professional diplomats will be with his new team for the president-elect?
Okay, I think that the business community is deeply influential in Argentina's economy, in Argentina's politics. We saw in these elections that many different partners were getting closer to Milei when he won the primary elections with 30% of the total votes. So we saw a realignment of the economic community around Milei. Even though we should say that this is not the 100% of the business community, that there were also connected to the Sergio Massa, the official candidate of the Peronist Party. What we are looking right now is a realignment of different forces. One of them is the breaking of the Juntos por el Cambio, Macri's former president Mauricio Macri party, that divided because of the support of Milei. We saw many of Macri's allies getting close to Milei that probably will receive a position in the government and an alignment of the economic sectors. So I tend to believe that this will produce a change and probably a more pragmatic alignment and with more professionals in the government. But the majority of...
We have to stop there, Professor. Thank you. Sure. And with that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks again to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.